The young men recovered enough to tell what had happened. "It was Judas," said Daniel. Benjamin shook his head. "It was the chief priests too, and the Romans, and the people. It was all of us in some way." "But the people loved him," faltered Naomi. "You'd think, wouldn't you?" said Benjamin. "At the start of the week they were hailing him as Messiah. Then within days they were howling for his death." "Tell us what happened, lads," said Caleb. "Try to remember." "There was a plot," said Daniel. Judas and his 12 closest followers," said Rachel. "Yes, Judas sold him to the chief priests. They paid him to say when it would be easy to catch him and to point him out to the guards. After the Passover meal, they'd gone out to one of the hills near Jerusalem. Jesus wanted to pray. I mean, he was praying." He broke down again and Benjamin took over. "We didn't know anything about it at the time, but they sent this big group of temple guards with Judas, all armed and everything." "Were none of our boys armed?" asked Zebedee. "1 or 2 were." "Peter was," sniffed Daniel. "Yes, Simon Peter was," continued Benjamin. "He attacked one of the guards, sliced his ear off, but Jesus put it back and told his men not to fight. You know how he is. I mean..." He couldn't bear to change it to "was," so he trailed off. "So they arrested him?" prompted Caleb, who seemed determined that they should hear the whole story. Tammy's mind was swimming and she couldn't take it in. Why hadn't Jesus seen the danger? Why hadn't he avoided it and stayed safe here in Galilee? It would have been so easy. "Yes," said Benjamin, pulling himself together. "They arrested him and put him on trial straight away." "In the middle of the night?" chipped in several people. "That's against our laws," said Zebedee. "Oh yes, the whole trial was a sham," said Daniel. "They had witnesses who made up stories and none of the stories agreed. It was a complete mess." Tammy gulped. "Did they try him at..." "It was the council who tried him. Yes, the Sanhedrin," said Benjamin, knowing what she couldn't ask. Tammy closed her eyes. Her father was on that council. Naomi steeled herself to ask about Jairus, but no words came. Benjamin and Daniel looked at each other. "Well," said Zebedee, "did the rabbi speak up for him at the council? Did Jairus and his friends try to save him?" "No," said Benjamin. "Nobody said a word for him, not one of us. Jairus went into hiding as soon as he got the summons for the council meeting. It was the first we knew about the arrest. We were scared for our own lives. Later on, next morning, the Roman governor gave the crowd the choice between Jesus and some murderer. He said he'd let one of them go free, and not one of us had the guts to ask for Jesus." He hung his head in shame, and those who hadn't been there thought what it must have been like. They all knew they would have done the same. "Even Peter let him down," said Daniel, glancing apologetically at Peter's wife, Rebecca. "Shush," interrupted Benjamin. "There's no need to tell that." "Tell it all," said Caleb. "While the trial was on, some girl recognized Simon Peter as one of Jesus's followers," said Daniel. "Peter swore blind again and again he didn't even know him. Said he'd never seen him before in his life." Rebecca was staring straight ahead, glazy-eyed. Daniel turned to her. "You must try to understand. Please don't blame him." She smiled, a watery smile. "I don't." "But imagine how he must blame himself," said old Sarah. "You said about the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate," said a voice they'd never heard before. It was Lucius, timid to speak as it was forbidden for Roman slaves amongst free people, yet desperate to know all that had happened. "Yeah, Pilate put him on trial too, said Benjamin. And Herod Antipas, because Jesus was from Galilee. They were passing in between them for hours. It all went quiet. Nobody wanted to hear what happened next. But once more, Caleb pushed relentlessly on. So Pilate passed the sentence. Eventually, yeah, said Benjamin. He tried to get out of it. He had him flogged. I think he was hoping the council would agree to let him go after that. But they wouldn't, nor the people neither. So he passed the sentence, even though he said Jesus had broke no laws. You should have seen the mob. There'd have been a riot if he hadn't. What was the charge he used? Asked Marcellus the centurion. He would have to put some charge in the records. Treason, I think, said Daniel. Treason against the Roman emperor, because some of the people had said he was their king. Marcellus went white. Treason? But that would mean the punishment for treason is crucifixion. Benjamin nodded. Yeah, was all he said. Caleb could hardly bear to continue, but he forced himself to ask one last question. Did you see him die? No, said Daniel. I wanted to stay. I hadn't spoken out for him. I was too afraid, but I did want to be with him till the end. But my brothers wouldn't let me. We thought they'd be coming for us next, his followers. James and John were staying and Mother wouldn't leave, but they said I must come home. He would have stayed, said Benjamin. He was refusing to budge, so Jairus ordered me to get him home. I had to fight and drag him through the streets to make him go. It was getting on for 9 in the morning when we were leaving, said Daniel. The crowds were teeming because of the Passover, and of course people were gathering to see Jesus pass by on his way to the execution. At one point it was solid. We couldn't get any further. And then they came by, the soldiers and 2 other prisoners, and Jesus. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and Tammy thought she could take no more. He looked at me, Daniel went on. He actually looked at me, right into my eyes. He was half dead already, with blood running down his back, and down his face too, from some stupid crown of thorn plants they'd made him wear to mock him. He was carrying part of his cross and stumbling around, and every time he fell, they hit him. And they laughed at him. And he looked right at me, right into my face. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't make them stop. I wanted to rescue him. I wanted to make them kill me with him, but I couldn't even do that. So I just looked at him. And he looked at me with so much pain and love in his eyes. And I thought my heart would break. I wish it would. So that was it. There was nothing more to be said. It was true that someone might have rescued Jesus, or the authorities might have changed their mind. But there had been that darkness. They all knew beyond a doubt that the darkened sky and deep, deep, distant rumbling had marked Jesus' death. Tammy found her way onto the roof. She sat in her corner, gazing at the stars in the cold for the rest of the night, until at last the sky began to go a dreary grey and dawn was near. There was the morning star. It was wasting its energy, sparkling at her like that, trying to show her how to hope. Hope had gone from the world. She looked at it without caring, until it faded as the sun crept over the horizon and tried to warm her with its beams. There was a noise in the distance. She didn't care about that either, but it grew louder and she couldn't blot it out. It sounded like a bunch of partygoers, whooping and having a good time. They were probably drunk. She covered her ears against the noise. It hurt her that people could be so happy. But it carried on getting closer and closer, so eventually she poked her head over the wall and gazed apathetically up the road out of Capernaum. There they were, a big crowd of people and donkeys and goodness knows what, laughing and dancing towards the town, waving palm leaves and brightly coloured scarves. Tammy was about to turn away when suddenly she saw something that made her gasp. There, in the middle of the revellers, waving to her like he was fit to bust, was her father.